Welcome back. And of course, we're looking back on the third quarter crime statistics that were released on Friday. And those stats revealed that contact crimes such as murder increased by 10.1%, sexual offences up by 9.6%. And of the 7,555 people who were murdered in the country in that third quarter, 3,144 were actually killed with a firearm. And this, of course, top of mind in the country, given what happened to Kiernan, aka Forbes. And we also saw almost 2,500 people dying as a result of weapons such as knives, other sharp or blunt instruments, people using bricks to commit murder, and in some instances, their bare hands. And it's not only violence and the murder and rape, but also just general lawlessness in South Africa that seems to be out of control. We spoke to the minister in terms of, what's going on, Transnet telling Parliament about the theft and vandalism and what the impact has had on their revenue as an entity. So there is a lot going on in South Africa. Cable theft, we all feel the effects of, and so there's a lot to talk about there. But social justice activist Father Michael Lapsely from the Institute for the Healing of Memories based in Cape Town joins us now virtually to talk about this escalation of murder and violent crime in South Africa and what it means. Where does this take us as a society? Father Lapsely, so good to have you with us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Happy to be with you.
The crime stats, unfortunately, doesn't make for great reading, Father. More than 10% increase in murder, almost 10% increase in sexual offences. What's your view of what is currently happening in South Africa? And also, if possible, what needs to be done in order to turn this around?
No, thank you. I think the statistics are extremely sobering. I think when the murder of AKA and Tabalo happened a few days, it sent a shiver down the spine of South Africans because it said in a way that none of us are safe. So the statistics have simply confirmed that. I think the nation needs to hear from government, what is the plan? What are we going to do systematically to address? I think particularly worrying is this issue of organized crime. We see it in the construction industry. We see it in the mafia of the taxi industry in so many areas. So clearly there has to be some major reform of the police. The only plan at the moment they seem to have is to say, okay, we're going to have more cops on the ground. And that may be a good thing, but it's not a systematic plan to be able to professionalize our police. And I think unless we see a plan which is then systematically executed, then we are sliding very rapidly to be a mafia state. I think the problem is often from our politicians, we get verbalism, we get good talk, but we don't see that transformed. And of course, part of it will be the appointment, the much overdue appointment of new cabinet ministers. We are told that President Cyril Ramaphosa is strengthened within the ANC, but we don't see that translated into urgent action so that we have capable political leaders as well as the administrators of justice. I think there are signs of hope within the NPA, within the Independent Directorate. I think perhaps much of the nation would like to see something as effective as the Scorpions coming back. And if we had that kind of capability in action, then we could perhaps begin to turn back this terrible trajectory, which is part of the overall despondency that the nation feels at the moment. I think also many of us hope that the president will refuse to sign this hopeless electoral act that will prevent effectively having constituency-based politics where the politicians are accountable to the nation and not to the political party. So I think we need to look at, multiple areas. But I notice in what the minister says, that he says that what fuels crime as well is poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Now we keep on hearing the ANC saying that, but we don't see the kind of actions to change that. And I think people like Archbishop Makoba have been saying we also need a new economic codessa, because we keep hearing from the political parties those issues being mentioned, but we don't see a transformation towards alleviating poverty, unemployment, inequality. And until we do that, that also continues to feed crime as well. So we need a new kind of ethical politics as well, and perhaps a new kind of united democratic front. Because what, in fact, I note is that while there's more and more cynicism about the acts of the politicians, civil society has never been as active and is occupying the space and giving hope to the nation. But that doesn't defend people in only the ways that the police can.
So interestingly, you touched on perhaps the need for another crime-fighting entity like the Scorpions. And that's interesting because when we look at that police climate survey in 2021 that I asked the minister about, the police are not even trusting themselves. Then we look at the community not trusting the police. But also, it all seems rather overwhelming, Father Lapsely, if you think of how much there is to contend with and the fact that we don't seem to have any clear strategies to deal with. Where and how can we start with what we have at the moment to try and deal with it?
Well, I suppose you're right. I think many of us in the nation do feel overwhelmed. So I think we, in the end, need to see what the big picture is and then go for the bite size. Step by step. And I think the strengthening of the ID, for example, making it a permanent institution, that is one step. And there seems to be a process towards that. But I suspect we also need a new police minister. We need a new head of the police as well, fit for purpose, who can begin to transform that institution. So some are within the gift of the president that he needs to act. I think time is up and over for Becky Haley as the Minister of Police.
But what is that going to change, if I'm being cynical here? Because would it matter if the president just shuffles his cabinet and moves the current crop of ministers around? What can he possibly do? Who could he possibly appoint?
Not shuffling the cabinet, putting new, competent, ethical ministers in place. And that's very different from shuffling around the present lot.
So who could he possibly bring in to deal with the crime situation?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, Kamwendo, and the nation would as well. But there must be within the sectors of those who have skill and competence in that area, capable technocrats who can do that. And a lot has been written about how the police could professionalize rather than simply having more boots on the ground as well. So I think the skill and the studies have been done that could provide the way forward for that. But it'll have to be systematic as well. But there has to be, it won't happen without political will, but also the issue of integrity is fundamental in every sector of the nation, because unless we have people of integrity, we're going nowhere as a country. So the need to become a more ethical society extends to every sector of our country. And this is why every sector has a role to play, including, of course, leadership that we need to see coming forth from civil society, but also from the faith community, as well as from the political class, who's not simply acting in their own interests, but we need a new kind of patriotism as well.
So very interesting, all of this. And one looks at what's happening within communities themselves. If you look at rape, for example, 5,935,000 rape incidents reported. And of that, most of it took place in residences where the victims reside. The perpetrators often well known to the victims. These could be family members, friends, neighbors. How do we deal with this, Father? You talk about, becoming a community of integrity, but how do we deal with issues such as these, where we as society can first and foremost perhaps take responsibility ourselves before we hand it over to the criminal justice system?
No, thank you. I think especially when it comes to gender-based violence, it's not simply a matter of the criminal justice system. It's about a conversation that we need to have as a nation, between men and between women, but also as an Institute for Healing of Memories, we have a program called At the Hands of Men. Sometimes we use a passive tense talking of gender-based violence, but it's we who are men who carry that out. So we need a deeper national conversation about what it means to be a man. And I think often as men, we are not equipped to deal with our emotions. And so we burst out in anger rather than deal with our own vulnerability and inadequacy. And of course, that is fed by issues of poverty and unemployment, where men feel emasculated as well. So we need to be able to speak about that and say, what role does every man in our country have to play in fighting gender-based violence? And that's a very important and deep conversation. That in the end, it's about the liberation, not just of women, but the liberation of men too, for us to become fully human. It also relates to how we bring up the boy child, and how the boy child is taught to be able to express their emotions in healthy ways and have the kind of respect for themselves as well as respect the boy child for the girl child as well.
And of course, that's such a huge conversation, Father Lapsely, because we know that many fathers are absent in the lives and during the upbringing of these young men and women in our society. And the consequences of those sort of absentee parenting is evident for all to see. But just a final question as we wrap this up, Father Lapsely. We spoke about the bite-sized chunks and the low-hanging fruit, perhaps. What can we do, just one thing right now, to try and heal the situation? Because it seems as though lawlessness has overtaken us as a nation, as a society. What can we do differently to try and change this?
I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge the pain that we are carrying as a society and demand of our leaders at every level of society that they play their part to transform our nation. We need to pray that also our president develops a greater, stronger backbone to play his role as the leader of our nation and speaks with deeper empathy, but also decisively to lead our nation.
Father Lapsely, thanks so much for your time. As always, a social justice activist, Father Michael Lapsely, speaking to us from Cape Town. He's with the Institute for Healing of Memories, sharing his views on whether South Africa basically has lost control. And of course, much more to be had in terms of the discussion points that we touched on.